Babies are dependent on cow's milk for their very lives. It would be hard for the human race to get along without our foster mother, the cow. Modern dairy farms are the symbol of cleanliness, with their neat corrals, white fences, and tidy barns. Jim, the work foreman, is taking food to the different corrals. Dobbin and Black Beauty are trained to haul the wagon through the network of farm lanes and gates. The cows have 3 meals, one in the morning, one at noon, and one in the evening. Part of the cow's food is mixed in the silo and is made up of alfalfa, oats, hay, and molasses. Some of their food is raised on the farm. Other food includes such things as cottonseed, linseed, and barley. The diet is carefully arranged to give the cow strength and to increase her milk supply. Beretta drinks daintily. Perhaps the water is too cold. She will drink about 10 gallons a day. The crystal clear water shows the high standard of care on this modern farm. It takes a lot of work and scrubbing to keep the barns, stalls, and troughs clean. Every minute in the cow's life is planned so that she will produce a quantity of pure, rich milk. Cows tend to pick out certain other cows for their special friends. One finds them together day after day, sometimes with their necks crossed or just resting near each other. Salt is kept in the troughs at all times because cows, like people, must have their minerals and vitamins. The bulls have individual paddocks. These bulls are fine, strong specimens and should have the best of calves. They are carefully handled, so they're gentle. Special food builds their huge frames and gives them power. This bull, named Bet, has a good appetite. It takes a lot of food to fill up these animals. They have 4 stomachs. Did you ever try to hit a bullseye? Well, now's your chance. The superintendent proudly shows a year-old bull to a buyer, Mr. Allen. This bull is the son of Bet and shows his fine breeding and excellent care. A bull is led by a ring in his nose because this has been found the most practical for the farmer and the best for the bull. Mr. Allen likes the massive frame, the straight back, the fine big hindquarters, the wide spring of the ribs, the clean legs, and the well-set, beautiful head. Mr. Allen buys this bull for $700. Mrs. Crooked Horns enjoys an afternoon's rest. Did your mother ever tell you you were as awkward as a cow? When she eats, the cow first swallows her food almost whole. Later, it comes back up in the form of cud and is re-chewed. Watch carefully, and you can see the cow bring up her cud. Oh, you missed. Watch more carefully. There it goes. A large mouth is a point of beauty in a cow. She must be a good eater to produce a quantity of milk. About every 3 months, cows must be clipped. The state law demands that their udders and tails be clipped so they will be free from hair. A dairyman clips the heads of his cows so they will show off their fine points. The horns are cut off if the cow is rough or if the horns are deformed. Good horns are a point of beauty. Milking time, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Each milking lasts 2 hours. The milkers bring the cows in from the different corrals to the milking barns. The milkers wash the barns and sterilize the buckets before each milking. Every cow will go directly to her own stall or stanchion. The cows look forward to the milking because they are fed at this time, and also their bags feel tight and would get sore if they were not milked regularly. Giralda is led out for a special demonstration of milking. She holds many state records. For 3 consecutive years, she has produced over 20,000 pounds of milk. Giralda has the soapy nose of the moo cow moo. A healthy cow has a wet nose because cows only perspire through their noses. Giralda is worth $10,000, and her calves are very valuable too. Giralda's udder has already been washed, and now it is carefully wiped. Everything is done to ensure pure milk, free from harmful bacteria. Each cow is an individual and must be handled differently. The skilled milker has rhythm in his long strokes. Jim is careful in working around the cow not to upset her. If she gets excited, she may hold her milk. Whoa, boss. Steady there. That's it. Be a good bossy. Oh, girl. Easy. Giralda wears her farm identification number around her horns. She is a fine example of a Guernsey cow, with her straight back and large, deep body. An average milking for one cow is 4 gallons. Some cows give as much as 8 gallons. At the milk house, daily records are kept of the weight of each cow's milk. Monthly tests are made by a milk tester from the state university to determine the amount of butterfat. This herd has a fine butterfat record, a characteristic of Guernsey cows. Well, Dobbin and Black Beauty are still busy making the rounds of the different corrals. Now it is time to feed the calves that are 8 months old. Each age has special food and special care. Any dairyman would be proud of this line of purebreds. Here are the barns for the very young calves. The calves are taken from their mothers when they are a day old because these highly bred cows have milk too rich for the babies. Ed has charge of the mothers and calves. First, the babies must be taught to drink from a bucket. Special things like calf meal are added to their diet, like a baby's formula. This baby already trusts Ed. Like the cows, the calves spend several hours a day in their pastures. Ed trains them to be gentle and affectionate. Guernsey cows are famous for their good dispositions. These calves represent the fulfillment of a dairyman's dream. With their exquisite, intelligent heads, graceful, strong bodies, and beautiful fawn-colored coats. Calves are inquisitive like children and watch everything that goes on around them. Princess May of Green Meadows has a baby, Daisy, just an hour and a half old. Each mother and calf have their own corral. May dries off her calf and cares for her, and Daisy responds to mother's affection. Cows tell their own babies by their sense of smell. One of the first things the calf tries to do is to stand up. Come on. Oh, too bad. It is the natural impulse for all mothers to guard their babies, and the cow has a deeper maternal instinct than any other animal. The neighboring cows are jealous and wish Daisy belonged to them. Cows want every calf they see. Daisy wants food. A calf is born with its eyes open, but Daisy seems to be having trouble finding her dinner. It isn't here, or here, or hear. But she will look until she finds it, and nature will tell her what to do when she does find it. And so we leave Princess May, mothering not only her own baby, but in reality, the whole human race.
Kevin Salwin of the Wall Street Journal. Why did the U.S. government choose to stand by and watch Drexel Burnham collapse?
Well, the point of the government's action, by the government here, we're talking about the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Reserve Board, and the Treasury. Basically what they decided was you can sit back and watch Drexel collapse as long as it does not create a problem throughout the entire junk bond market, throughout the entire financial system. They measured those risks and decided to just let Drexel go as a private corporation.
Does this indicate a new direction for SEC policy?
Well, what it does say is it's about the first time they've said they've gone past the rule too big to fail. I mean, as you've seen through a number of corporations, the government has said, well, it's a little bit too big, it might cause potential shocks, so we'll give them some money, we'll help tie them over. The government in this case decided not to do that, as they haven't done in several other situations, but it's still a fluid situation.
Was the filing for bankruptcy something unexpected on Wall Street, or was this coming for a while?
Well, it had been growing for about the past 6 months. You could really see Drexel's situation deteriorating. The junk bond market was collapsing, which was cutting the value of what Drexel owned as the buyer of last resort of a whole bunch of junk bonds of deals that they had put together. Plus, as that collapsed, the financing business, the deal business, the takeover business continued to collapse with it. That hurt junk bonds even further, and it sort of became a spiral that went through, and you could sort of see in about the past 2 or 3 weeks that things were getting very bad for Drexel.
Good morning again from Washington. For the next 45 minutes, we will be discussing the bankruptcy of Drexel Burnham Lambert. Our guest today is Kevin Salwin. He is the financial regulations reporter with the Wall Street Journal, and he's been with the Journal for 7 years. He came to Washington in September of '89, and previously he covered financial markets in New York and wrote the Heard on the Street column in the Wall Street Journal. We welcome your phone calls. We'll be going to your calls in about 5 minutes or so. You'll see the numbers on the bottom of your screen. If you're in the Eastern or Central time zone, please use 202-628-2525, Mountain and Pacific 202-783-2727. And just a reminder about our 30-day policy, don't call us this morning if you've called in the last 30 days or so. We want to get as many calls as we can. I want to hold up a cartoon that was in today's Washington Post, done by Herb Block, and ask you, who are the creditors that are involved in this for Drexel Burnham?
Well, the large creditors here, and 15 of the 22 largest unsecured creditors, are foreign firms and banks. They add up to, I guess, about a total of $250 million. In addition, there are 7 U.S. financial institutions that come to about $140 or $150 million.
And will the federal government be affected by this financially?
Well, that's sort of the interesting wild card in all this. The federal government owns, as I'm sure many of your viewers already know, a whole bunch of junk bonds through takeovers of bad thrifts, through the RTC and
Resolution Trust Corporation.
Yeah, through the bailout of a whole bunch of insolvent thrifts. So part of what those thrifts were holding was junk bonds. If the junk bond market collapses as a part of this, which at this point it doesn't seem like it's going to do, but it's still much too early to tell, the government could be left holding the bag. In addition, as part of Drexel Burnham's settlement last year on criminal charges of securities fraud with the federal government, specifically with the SEC, there was a $650 million settlement that was reached. Only $500 million of that has been paid by Drexel. So there's another $150 million, which it was designed to go to claimants who felt that they had been defrauded by Drexel. And that money hasn't arrived yet. The government will have to stand in line to wait for that.
In the last couple of days, many analysts are hailing this as the end of an era. What does that mean?
Well, the 80s was really a remarkable time for takeovers in this country. What you had was, you had the advent of the corporate raider, the guy who all of a sudden bought a stake in a company, forced it into submission, and funded that with junk bonds. Those were Drexel junk bonds. At this point, that you can contend that the takeover boom is over and the junk bond era is over.
Our guest this morning is Kevin Salwin of the Wall Street Journal. Let's take our first call from Manahawkin, New Jersey. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello. I can hardly hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go right ahead.
Oh, well, it seems like just 6 or 8 months ago, the government fined the company like $600 million or something like that. And now they're taking a dive into bankruptcy, and it seems to me there must be some kind of a connection there or something like that. I really don't know how to frame the question, but that's what I think.
Well, that's an interesting point, and it's one that has been brought up by some academics, was that what the government left was such a weak entity in Drexel that there was really no way that it was going to be able to come back from this pounding of the settlement and be a viable firm and a lively firm. There is some agreement with that. However, the government will defend its standpoint by saying, hey, look, we're just fining because we wanted to do that as restitution for criminal activities.
Erie, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning, Kathy, Kevin. I have a question for you, Kevin, on how far does this truly extend? If I'm correct, it was Milken and Drexel that helped finance T. Boone Pickens' takeover bids, and it seems like this extends quite a ways. And from Middle America here, it seems like everybody's got to wash their hands of this or pay the piper, and I don't really see that taking place. Maybe you could elaborate more on the history of those takeovers and how much was actually involved in all of this. Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm trying to do a little quick math in my head here. I don't think I'm going to be able to as to the total value of takeovers through the 80s. And the question being, when you had guys like T. Boone Pickens or Carl Icahn or Saul Steinberg or the big takeover raiders of the 1980s, they clearly were deeply involved, as were a whole bunch of thrifts, as were a whole bunch of insurance companies, and obviously the targets were America's corporations. I mean, the extent of this and the breadth of this is huge, obviously. The question is sort of where the ripples will end now that Drexel has gone into the bankruptcy phase.
Lansing, Michigan, you're on the air.
Yes, I would like to ask, how did all this junk bond markets and leverage buyout stuff start? Like in the 1960s and 1970s, you didn't have many of these things going. Well, I didn't hear anything about this things going on. So, what was the circumstances that led people to have these opportunities that they didn't have before? Maybe they did have them before, but I didn't see them.
Here's what happened. Back in the 70s and even in the 60s, there were good credits for companies and there were bad credits for companies. A company like Coca-Cola could borrow at the lowest interest rates and have the best credit ratings, and an upstart company or a company that was on poor financial footing couldn't, and they would have to borrow at higher interest rates and borrow at C ratings or double B ratings or however the rating agency said it. But they were considered non-investment grade. Well, enter a gentleman named Michael Milken, who figured out that if you do a statistical analysis of the failure rates of these, it's not reflected by the higher percentage rates. So what you could do is you could issue lots and lots of these non-investment grade bonds, and people would buy them up because, as Mr. Milken showed, A, the failure rate wasn't as high as everyone had expected it to be, and B, Drexel was sitting there saying, look, you have a problem with this, come back to us, we'll buy them from you. Well, that worked fine for a while for smaller companies, upstart companies, companies that were in trouble, until Mr. Milken also realized that what you can do is you can fund takeovers by doing this. And rather than coming in with a cash offer or a stock offer, you could come in and you could say, all right, we'll pay for it with debt. We'll borrow the money and use high-rated, high-yield junk bonds to do it, low-rated, high-yield junk bonds to do it, and you could, at that point, fund a company. That's how this sort of explosion happened, and that's how the corporate raidership of the 80s took off.
What is Michael Milken's status right now?
Michael Milken is facing indictments on 98 counts of fraud and manipulation. He is fighting the charges. And he has not agreed in any way to plead guilty. He is, as part of the last year's settlement agreement with Drexel, he has left the firm, and he is off on his own doing some other enterprise, awaiting his trial.
Lech, Austria. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Well,
Hello.
we are just snowed in here, so we have time to watch your program. And the question is, are there any investment trusts who are in fact basing their portfolio on junk funds, junk bonds, and in Europe? And could you give us the name of the people who sell this in Germany or in Austria? Thank you.
If I understood you, caller, you were asking whether there are trusts in Europe that are selling junk bond related investments?
He's no longer on, but
okay. I would assume that there are. I honestly don't know the answer to that. Most of the junk bonds and related investments were sold in the United States, but Drexel does have an international network, as do a bunch of other investments. It should be noted also that that Drexel is not the only firm in the country that sells and packages junk bonds and other types of those investments. That market became so lucrative for Drexel that a whole bunch of other Wall Street firms got involved in it, and including Merrill Lynch and others. And so you're likely to find junk bonds just about everywhere you look, including a whole bunch of mutual funds and things like that.
for the layperson, what is a shorthand way of explaining a junk bond?
A junk bond is simply a low-rated, high-yield, high percentage rate bond where you are funding a company in exchange for you're putting up, say, $100, and the company agrees to pay you back, say, a 13% or 14% interest rate, as opposed to, say, the 8% that you might get on a bank CD. But you don't have any insurance on it. You don't have the same type of good credit quality that a Coca-Cola might give you or an IBM might give you. What you have is somebody like, say, Harcourt Brace or even RJR, which has $25 billion worth of debt that it needs to service, which becomes a problem sometimes.
Reston, Virginia, you're on C-SPAN.
Yes, good morning. Very important show. I've been following the economy and current events since about the second oil shortage in '79. And in my studies, I was trying to just corroborate with you a theory that I've had. When our economy was awash with the petrodollars, and there weren't enough American dollars to back up this sudden flood of wealth of that kind of investment capital, what they did was they invested it not only in American real estate, but the third world. And then when all the banks and investment houses got in trouble with third world investments that just went bad and are just written off, they had this machine going so fast, already going, they had to find some other way of keeping the money flowing. And I was just wondering if junk bonds was just a quick fix to try and keep all the money flowing through our economy. And then now this is going sour.
Well, that could be. That's sort of the grand macroeconomic theory of it all. I guess the way I look at it is it was a legitimate way to raise money for lesser quality companies or the companies that were sort of struggling, and it was a way to to finance takeovers and finance deals. And Wall Street is always looking for ways to create new products. I mean, that's the lifeblood of the street. It's the way you make money. You invent a product, you sell it, you own parts of it, you take pieces of companies in exchange for it, and that's the way the thing sort of self-perpetuates.
Buffalo, New York, good morning.
Good morning. What I'd like to ask you, this Canadian default on Mr. Camco of Bloomingdale's and all these department stores, doesn't that affect, see, I don't really consider the Justice Department, one of the prime things that I had always remembered in the acquisition of companies, there was one thing, how does this benefit the public? And when you get management that don't know anything about the business that they're entering into, I don't think that prerequisite was ever followed during the Reagan administration. They were just interested in exchanging dollars. By the time any governmental agency the lag time is so great that they fail to have any impact on it. They're issuing indictments after the fact, and there's no immediacy to get into the act and stop the frauds. There was an FBI agent recently that was quoted up here, an agent in charge, that said he spent 5% of his time when he initially come to the agency investing white-collar crime, and now he spends about 30% of his time. So I think that one of the things recently in Fortune magazine, they had one of these buyouts that they paid 970% of the book value of a company. I mean, obviously, I think you could go to somebody in a high school math class and ask them how you could possibly work out of that kind of debt. I mean, you don't have to be on the Federal Reserve or in the SEC to know that that's not going to fly.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome to the free market, sir. The way the Reagan administration has always viewed this is here are the rules. You can basically do just about anything you want, and we'll slap you down afterward on a remedial standpoint if you step over the line. But in the meantime, the market's going to slap you down if you step over the line. The free market theory has always been you can make the deal if you can finance the deal. If you can find somebody to lend you the money, you can make the deal. You can buy the company. In the Campo case, and it should be noted in discussing this that Mr. Campo is under no charges or no fraud situation here, but in that situation, clearly he overborrowed. I mean, there wasn't any doubt about it. When you looked at the amount of money pouring off of the businesses that he owned, and you compare that with the amount of debt payments he had to make on a monthly basis, there wasn't any question that that deal had to go under. And this is sort of the way the free market has worked here. When you have deals that are priced properly, and those will continue when you have deals that are priced properly, and the quality of the business and the money flying off the business will pay for the debt that you've accumulated, then deals will work, and they still will, and they will continue. But it's the deals that go to excess. Campo is a perfect example, that are going to fall apart and have been falling apart and will continue to fall apart, unfortunately.
Royal Palm Beach, Florida, you're next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I noticed Mr. Salwin is smiling through this. I noticed Mr. Darman smiles a lot when he's on camera. And my question is this. My first question was going to be, how come the Wall Street Journal and all of the economic gurus couldn't see this mess coming when I could see it 4, 5, 6 years ago? But that question was just dealt with a minute ago with our obeisance to the free market. I want to know what is so sacred or sacred about the free market that gave us the stock market crash of 29, 87, 89, that gave us the savings and loan debacle, that gave us this situation with Drexel Burnham Lambert. We don't know where it's going to go. What is so sacred about the free market that gives us all of this mess that hurts millions and millions of innocent people, stupid people, and possibly greedy people?
Well, that's a good question. My apologies for smiling. That's something my mother always taught me to do. But and let me also say, as sort of as a side note, that the Wall Street Journal's money and investing pages have spent a lot of time over the past couple of years talking about the debt levels and the risk that they pose. But the situation that the Reagan administration has set up in terms of allowing the free market to go is one that the administration, the Republicans, the conservatives believe is the one that built the country into greatness. If you allow people to entrepreneurially create whatever they want to create, then you'll have the opportunity to build up the great democratic capitalist system that we have here. Obviously, at this point, you realize that there are excesses in the system, and some of those do need to be curbed. And there's a whole bunch of people in Congress right now who are looking at how to curb that. But let's face it, I mean, Congress has been looking at takeovers for 5 years, 10 years, possibly even longer, and no one's been able to agree to get anything done about them because every time you come in and you try to put together a bill that would limit takeovers or protect shareholder rights or protect employee rights or something like that, you get that convergence of interest. I mean, if you look back at the 80s, there are a whole lot of people who made a whole lot of money, and they gave a whole lot of that money to Congress, too. So it becomes that sort of intertwined web, and it's difficult to figure out sort of where that all ended and where that all played out.
Ocala, Florida. Go ahead, please.
I'd like to point out that when the Valdez got torn open, that the United States government fined Exxon. And when 3 Mile Island went up, the federal government fined Commonwealth Edison. And when something happens wrong in Drexel, what does the government do? They fine them $500 million. The outfit goes under, and then we're paying off with the Drexel, the thrift debt, because the thrifts went under, and the junk bonds are what the thrifts were holding. I mean, I think the trouble is our stupid government, that we got a Justice Department that has one head and we have some other head somewhere else. It just doesn't make sense to me. Would you comment on that, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let me give you an idea of what the SEC would say about that, though the SEC hasn't been speaking much during this situation. The SEC would say, if we had let Drexel continue to operate, and if we had not allowed them to slip into bankruptcy, we would have been posing a broader risk to the junk bond market. What we needed to determine was that the risk was focused solely on Drexel. By allowing the bankruptcy, we allowed that to happen. If we had allowed Drexel to go on any further and allowed them to have an infusion of money, who knows where the junk bond market would have gone? Who knows how much worse it would have gotten? Who knows how it would have spilt over into other areas, including the thrifts that we and the American public are holding? That's what the SEC probably would contend if they were speaking about this.
Rustin, Louisiana, you're on the air.
I want to commend the Wall Street Journal for the excellent article that they had in yesterday's paper on the editorial page, the title of which, Echoes of the 50 in the Rooney Witch Hunt, condemning CBS. If you have not read that, Kevin, I hope you will. I commend your paper highly.
Well, thank you, sir.
You have a question? Oh, I guess not this morning. How big a problem do life insurance companies face with the junk bond situation?
They are the ones that are sort of probably the most questionable here. There are several that are very heavily involved in junk bonds, and by that I mean they might have 10% of their holdings in junk bonds. It probably would not be a bad idea for you to check with your insurance folks as to whether your annuity is in decent shape. Probably 99% of them are in fine shape, and there's nothing for people to worry about. But there are some situations where, since insurers were a big player in the junk bond market, they could be in some trouble.
Could policyholders lose money?
They could, arguably, yeah. I mean, we're obviously that was another consideration that the government looked at, but and in most situations, I think it's 44 states out of the 50 have insurance funds that are guarantees, and so there really shouldn't be an enormous swamping of folks and their insurance.
Elmira, New York. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Do you know, or do you suppose it will ever possible to know to what extent Drexel was involved in selling junk bonds to the troubled S&Ls?
Well, we certainly know that there are a number of them that did and do invest in junk bonds. In fact, one of the real areas of focus for the federal agencies now is to try to wean thrifts off of junk bonds. In fact, that one of the arguments for why the junk bond market has been collapsing in the past few weeks and months is that the government told the S&Ls that they could no longer hold junk bonds. That's part of the thrift bailout bill. And in doing so, they basically said, hey folks, you've got to sell these things. Well, obviously, when you have it's a strict supply and demand thing. If you have a whole bunch of bonds being tossed onto the market, the price of them goes down. That also hurt Drexel's holdings a lot.
North Miami, Florida. You're on C-SPAN.
Yes, hello. I happen to be one of the victims of the carnage of the takeover of Eastern Airlines.
Sorry to hear that.
And thousands of us are out of work. In fact, my husband has to leave this country to get equivalent work in his profession. He's a pilot. And as you well know, pilots have to start their career over when they leave their company. And we really view, and of course we're probably one of the worst scenarios of these junk bond takeovers, and there are two things that concern me that maybe you could comment on. One of them is when the president vetoed our call for an investigation of all of this scandal that's going on. We feel like the government in some way is protecting unethical and dishonest practices, and there will be plenty of lawsuits yet coming. There's a lot of legal action that's yet going to be taken in all this. The second thing is, what is the corporate world doing to address the carnage to human lives and the unemployment lines that they're increasing with their whole free market policy? And I certainly am all for the free market, but there must be some guidelines and some ethical considerations of what this does to human beings in our economy. And could you comment on those things, please?
Boy, you have nailed the issue with that one. The debate that has been going for about the past 10 years is, okay, if you let these corporate raiders move in, the people who will take the hardest losses are the people who are working at the companies. They are the people who are forming the communities around which these corporations were built. And that has always been the debate between the free marketeers and the people who want some protections. The free marketeers say the shareholders are the owners. If the shareholders want to get their stock bought from them at an inflated price by a raider, by another corporation, by whoever, well, so be it. They're the owners. The other folks are saying, yeah, but that's not the only people we should be worrying about here. The owners aren't the only one who are the risk. The employees are the ones who are at risk, and the fabric of the economy is what's at risk here. And that's really what the raging debate has been over the past decade or so, and I think you've nailed it. I don't think there are any easy answers to that either.
Springfield, Virginia, you're next.
Thank you. It's my first call, and I'd like to ask your guest about the effect of tax treatment of junk bonds to its growth.
Well, that's another good question. One of the things that the federal government has started to realize in the past year or so, not that it's acted on it particularly yet, but it has realized it, is that when you have bonds that are replacing stock investment, the companies get a better treatment. You can deduct the interest payments from your corporate taxes. When you pay out dividends on stock, you're taxed on that once as a corporation, then you're taxed on that, then the individual is taxed on that money as a dividend. The government realizes that this is unfair, and the Bush administration has decided that is something that they want to do. They want to do something about. There hasn't been any action on that yet, but you're likely to see that pretty soon.
Guthrie, Oklahoma. Good morning.
Yes, I'd like to talk about some of the quotas and how goods coming in here are being held up by customs. And if we got a free market, why don't individuals get the freedom to participate in the market? And this corporate rating, it's bad, really bad, because when business gets inefficient, it should go under. And we need the technology to go ahead and be the suppliers of goods in the world. If we don't supply goods that they don't have, we'll just go under, because our trade deficit won't work, and lowering the value of our dollar in relation to other countries, it's just not doing any good for our country. We got to have technology so we can demand the price for our goods that we want.
The interesting and sort of ironic thing, I guess, here about junk bonds is that when they were first invented, when lower grade bonds were first sold, they were used for entrepreneurial reasons primarily. They were used to allow small companies to build up, to produce, to be able to grow when they couldn't get financing in the stock market. And somewhere along the way we sort of lost the direction, and we no longer sort of funded the growth of companies or the ability of smaller companies to sort of spring up and have the opportunity to build new products and invent new manufacturing techniques or whatever. But what we did do was we sort of said, okay, well, if we can have massive takeovers, then let's do it. And that's not necessarily advantageous to the country. That's not necessarily advantageous to employees. It is advantageous to shareholders, and it is advantageous to Wall Street. Somewhere along on the spectrum here, we need to figure out what makes sense.
Shreveport, Louisiana. Go ahead, please.
Yes. I see Kevin is very knowledgeable about this thing, and I'll just make a long story short. I've watched this too, and I saw when it went into the Raiders away from the LBOs that it was a chance for a lot of greed and misapplication. So my question is, why don't they consider having the Securities Exchange Commission take expanded roles when there's a large play on a stock? Say if it moves too fast or too hard, they call in the principals in these matters and have them disclose. Not only disclose, just regulate some of these deals they're putting together. In other words, if it's similar to a bankruptcy referee managing a company, why not? They say, well, now look, this is largely inflationary, and you either have to modify it, or you rescind it, or it will not be approved. Let the SEC approve some of these transactions. That's stopping coal in the track. They haven't already stopped a lot of it by now.
Well, once again, you're back to the free market question. The SEC neither wants that power, nor does the administration want to give the SEC that power. The SEC does have rules about disclosure of stock holdings and disclosure of positions and intention of people who are buying into companies. But once it gets beyond that stage and you've done the proper disclosure, the SEC basically has a hands-off policy. They'll let you go in and buy companies, and they're not interested in stopping that. The SEC is basically a part of the federal government at this point, which believes that the free market is the free market, and you should let it be.
West Haven, Connecticut.
Yes, I'd like to ask. I'm a first-time caller, and I apologize. I'm a little nervous. But what's going to happen with Drexel Burnham's Lambert's funds that are invested, for example, in government securities? I mean, as I understand it, Drexel Burnham is the owner of those securities, and when they're made good by the government, what happens to the investor of those funds? Does this go to the bankruptcy court, or does this go back to the investor?
Are you talking about mutual funds?
He's no longer.
He's no longer with us. Okay. Well, let me sort of go through the whole process, and we can explain this. The government securities that Drexel bought last week, in particular, where they signed up for $1 billion worth of government securities and now don't have the money to pay for them, those will go back into the marketplace. Fortunately for the government and for Drexel and for investors, the price of government securities has increased in the past week or so, and so there won't be any trouble selling those. In fact, they're in the process of selling them now. Investors really are the ones who don't have to worry very much about this bankruptcy situation. The big-time creditors, the folks who lent Drexel all this money, are the ones who have to worry. But for retail investors in particular, all those accounts have been shifted over already. Drexel, a while back, sold its mutual fund business to Zweig, and in the past couple of weeks, I guess it is, sold their, a couple months ago, sold their retail investment business to Smith Barney. So retail investors who are investing in stocks or bonds or mutual funds really don't have to worry very much in this situation. They're pretty well taken care of.
Tallahassee, Florida, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Sir, before you ask your question, if you could just turn down the volume on your television set, that would be a great help.
Okay, is that better?
Thanks. That's much better.
The free market situation certainly is to be supported generally, but after a period of expansion in the economy, increasing profits, increasing cash flows, increasing gross national product, and all of that, we still have not eliminated what we call the business cycle. Now, what may be justified on the basis of cash flow after a period of growth to issue junk bonds, when you have a recession, then that cash flow contracts, and those junk bonds then become not viable. Therefore, I think until we can eliminate business cycles, the government does have some responsibility to monitor the issuance of these bonds through either control of the financial institutions that are recommending them to their customers, or in some other way, so that when a recession does come, I'm afraid that all the junk bonds outstanding now, should we have a recession, even a slight one, that you would see much more of these bankruptcies than we see now.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. You will see more problems with junk bonds and with bankruptcies as the business cycle turns south. There are a whole number of junk bond issues that you probably won't have problems with. The companies that are in the food businesses, the retailing businesses, for example. People are always going to have to buy food, whether it's a recession or whether it's not. But there are a whole bunch of companies that are going to have difficulties. The question that you've raised here is an interesting one, because you're sort of talking about predicting when the next recession is going to be or when the business cycle will turn down, as opposed to saying, okay, well, you can just keep funding these things, you can just keep doing whatever you want to do. I mean, we've had people predicting a recession for about the last 6 years. So if the science is that imprecise, I'm not quite sure where you find the way to set guidelines or set rules for all this. The way the government has looked at it is, if you disclose that there are risks, if you disclose that there are potential difficulties, well, that's fine enough, and let the individual or let the institution decide when it makes its investment.
Idlewild, California. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
About this Drexel matter, where they fined the company $500 or $600 million, which, in my opinion, eventually led to this problem here. I don't think it's proper or moral to fine a company. If some individuals in the company did something illegal, then those individuals should be tried and fined or imprisoned and so forth. How can a whole corporation be guilty? Is the Wall Street responsible? Is the Wall Street Journal responsible for everything that you do? I'll hang up now and listen to your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the Wall Street Journal is responsible for what I do, which is why the Wall Street Journal employs libel lawyers as opposed to Kevin Selwyn. But in this situation, the government determined that the problems at Drexel were so endemic and so widespread throughout the firm that, yeah, they could go after a couple of individuals, but they wouldn't be hammering down the problem. And the problem, they felt, was the firm as a whole that had perpetuated this fraud. They are, as you're suggesting here, going after Michael Milken now, even as we speak, and that case is continuing. But the government apparently felt that Drexel, the firm, was the culprit, and Drexel, the firm, was the one that should be fined here.
Rockford, Illinois. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Selwyn his opinion. He has established that the economic policies of the past decade have been predominantly developed by the right wing of the political spectrum, and perhaps it appears to be at the expense of the left. What is the future outcome of those type of policies? I just can't imagine that it can go on indefinitely without some price to be paid.
Well, I can't imagine it's going to go on indefinitely either. I can't predict the future here, though you are already starting to see a backlash here. It seems, for the most part, that if the folks on the right side of the spectrum have said, let's go with the free market and let's let that expand our economy. Well, the folks on the free market are the ones who are going to have to take the lumps when some of this stuff unravels. And it will, some of it has already unraveled and some more will. And when you look at, say, for example, the thrift bailout, I mean, the Bush administration is now the one who's sitting there with $166 billion worth of debt that it's got to do something about. And it's the Bush administration that's liable for that.
Houston, Texas. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask the gentleman how he feels about the socialization of debt and the privatization of profits. Thank you very much.
Oh, how do I feel about it? I guess I see some problems in it. I mean, obviously, as you heard from the caller from Florida, there are a whole bunch of people who are out of work. I've never been a believer that we should keep people in jobs just to keep them in jobs, but in situations where we're over-leveraging to be able to streamline, and then we have situations where companies or airlines or whoever go under because of it. Obviously, there are some misjudgments. There are some people hurt because some folks somewhere decided that this was the right policy to pursue. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Phoenix, you're on the air.
Yes. Nobody seems to get a perspective on the exact size of the debt and the commitment to underwriting, let's say, failed brokerage houses. And I was just reading J. Paul Getty from like 20 years ago. He was complaining that our biggest problem was the deficit, which at that time was $475 billion. Now, if no one has a handle on this as to how much the deficit and other obligations of the United States government amount to in total, what is a prudent investor supposed to do? I mean, it's quite true you can continue issuing paper forever, United States government bonds forever, in the trillions. There's nothing to stop us from going to 3 or 4 trillion. At what point do responsible newspapers like the Wall Street Journal say, hey, it's got to in your editorials and say something about it? This is the end of it. We won't stand for it anymore.
Okay. I don't write the editorials, so I can't speak for the editorial page, but I think you've got a legitimate point, and you've got a point here that a number of people in Washington have been raising for years and years and years, is when this debt becomes a problem for us. Some would contend it already is a problem for us. I mean, right now, if the Japanese ever decided, hey, we're not going to buy government bonds anymore, we're going to stop, well, we would be awash with paper. Interest rates would go through the roof. And that would obviously ripple all the way through the economy. And so we've already gotten ourselves into a situation where we are over-leveraged, as it were, and I think the administration realizes that, Congress realizes that, which is why folks are actively trying to cut the deficit. But clearly, debt is a problem.
Our guest for the last 45 minutes has been Kevin Salwin. He is the financial regulations reporter at the Wall Street Journal. He's been with the Journal for 7 years and has been in Washington since September of 1989. He's originally from Brooklyn, New York, and tells me that he sings in weddings in his part-time. We thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. And that wasn't true, actually. I made that up. I'm sorry.
Thank you, anyway. To our viewers, we are standing by right now to bring you live coverage of an event at the National Press Club. It's sponsored by the U.S. Business and Industrial Council, and the topic is foreign influence in the American political process. They expect today to hear from John Judas, who is a writer who has written and covered this issue about the Japanese lobbying in the U.S., William Triplett II, a staff member with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and William Reinsch, Chief Legislative Assistant for Senator John Hines. You now see the room where they're setting up, getting ready to cover this event, and we will be going to that event live as soon as they get started. In the meantime, why don't we take a call? I believe we have a call waiting on the line here. Yes, go ahead, please. New York City?
Good morning. How
Good morning.
are you? Hi.
Go right ahead.
I enjoy your show very much.
Thank you. Go ahead. Do you have a question this morning?
Yes, I do, please. I would like to ask, good morning, Mr. Calvin.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask you, please, if you don't mind, after a person is 65 and retires, what is the best way a person could invest this money, his or her money? And after investing, how safe is it?
Well, my advice for people who are 65 is not to take risks with their money. I mean, the reason why you take risks with your money is so you can make it grow faster for the future 10, 20 years down the line. When you're 65, basically what you're looking to do is A, preserve your money, and B, throw off a little bit of income. My suggestion would be to either go into bank CDs or into money market funds with a solid Wall Street firm like Merrill Lynch, or somebody who's been around and established for a long time. It can pay you 8%, 8.5%, and throw off a little bit of income that way and keep your money pretty well safe. You don't want to take risks with your money at this point.
What is the mood on Wall Street right now in the wake of Drexel Burnham?
Well, the mood on Wall Street right now is about the same as it has been for about the past 2 years. It's terrible. Plainly put, I mean, there's been layoffs of about 50,000 people throughout the street, a variety of areas. Obviously, the mood at Drexel Burnham is terrible. There's another 5,000 employees there now who are awaiting the axe, and that's down from 11,000 just a year or two ago. The Wall Street is one of the worst managers of people. I mean, it builds too much when it grows, and it cuts too fast when it cuts. So,
Kevin Salwin, we thank you again for joining us. We're now going to go to live coverage of the event at the National Press Club.